Welcome back to your Systems Change course. My name is Olga, and today we will focus on the power of root cause analysis using the tool called Problem Tree, one of the key elements in the final strategy deck in your workbook. One definition of a systems change that we find really relevant suggests that a systems change is about shifting the conditions that are holding a problem in place. In other words, identifying the root causes and systemic drivers behind the problem and tackling them rather than symptoms or consequences. These systemic drivers are not always obvious, but one can get a better idea about them by investing time in a thorough problem analysis with a systemic lens on. In Ashoka's 40 years experience with social entrepreneurs, what we see is that the problem part of the strategy is not always clarified and is sometimes rushed over, taken for granted, or not necessarily underpinned with evidence. We have witnessed that a profound evidence-based problem analysis can open up a new perspective even for those social entrepreneurs who have been in business for years and lead to major strategy shifts and saving time and resources. Actually, if there was one piece of advice we could give to social entrepreneurs wanting to maximize their impact and reduce the risk of negative unintended consequences, it would be do not rush over the problem analysis. Invest more time together with your team into understanding the problem, evidence, and systemic drivers behind it. This understanding is a prerequisite for a true systemic solution. But what is it that can help us better understand the problem? Coming back to our metaphor of the forest, let's select and zoom into one specific tree, as we also have to decide on one big problem we want to focus on now. We believe that the structure of a tree mirrors well the structure of a social problem. Our problem tree will consist of three elements: a trunk, which embodies the big problem, which moves you to action; a crown, which illustrates the consequences if the problem is not solved; and the roots of the tree, which stand for the systemic root causes of the big problem. The journey from the roots to the crown is that of causal links. If the root is fixed, the consequences in the crown are likely to feel better. Just like a real tree, societal problems usually have multiple roots, some of them going deeper than the others, most of them intertwined with each other and with roots of neighboring problem trees. And just like autumn leaves falling from a tree, decomposing and enriching the soil with nutrients, consequences of the problem mentioned in the crown of the tree can feed the roots of the problem and thus reinforce it. The main purpose of this exercise is to help you make an informed choice of one of the systems that keep the problem in place and need to be improved. It helps you scope your work within the many root causes that drive the big problem. It is a deliberately simplified version of a potentially much more comprehensive root cause analysis and will therefore not lead to the production of an exhaustive map of all causes, effects, and feedback loops of the big problem. But it will help you focus your strategy while acknowledging and keeping track of the other root causes. Now we are ready to move on and fill out our template in the course workbook. We will start with the trunk of our problem tree, which stands for the big problem you decided to tackle. It is a very important element as it represents the starting point and the centerpiece of your strategy process. The following questions might help you arrive at a good definition of the big problem. Why are you doing what you're doing? Which big problem or injustice motivates you and your team to take action in the first place? We recommend that, when possible, you center the big problem around people, a specific constituency who is disadvantaged or experiencing poor quality of life. Also, when you talk about specific environmental issues, try to highlight their connection to humans. Let's apply this concept to our example and have a look at how Albina, Ashoka fellow from Peru, formulates her big problem statement. We're talking about the problem of sprawling waste in poor urban communities in Peru. Here are a few hints to refine your formulation. First, rather than just stating an abstract notion of waste management as a big problem, you can formulate the problem starting with a phrase specifying the social group affected, in our case, urban communities. Next, define the geographical scope of the problem to set some limits for your problem definition. Remember that systemic approach does not necessarily equal big scale, national or international level. Problems that you see at the level of your town or village, organization, and even a family can also become the pivot for the systemic efforts. Town, village, organization, and family, they all are systems. We can specify our example by saying urban communities in Peru. Third, highlight the scale of the problem today and bring to light trustworthy evidence you have about the big problem you have selected. How many people or which size of the territory or to which extent are affected by the big problem you have defined. In other words, what is the size of the full market of those who experience this problem within the geographical limits you set yourself, and whose lives or situations could be improved once the big problem is solved. Albina shared with us that out of 13,000 metric tons of waste generated in Peru every day, only 40% is properly collected. Please keep in mind that we mean late 1990s. Have a look at how our example will change this time. Urban communities in Peru are not disposing of their municipal waste in a sanitary and environmentally sustainable way. In other words, safe for people and planet. Out of 13,000 metric tons of waste generated in Peru every day, only 40% is properly collected. The rest ends up in open garbage dumps, on streets, in vacant lots, and along river and ocean shores. If you don't have reliable data at hand, or the last time you actually looked at such data was years ago, please take the time to do the research and find the most recent trustworthy data. Sometimes it happens that you don't find the exact data, and all you can use to underpin your problem statement is your guesstimate, or the extrapolation of data from a smaller scale project. In this case, it actually might be a good hint towards which change is needed in the system in the first place, as the absence of trustworthy data in a system might explain the inaction on the problem. Perhaps you could think about developing such data and drawing the attention of relevant stakeholders to it. Fourth, make sure to formulate the problem as a negative statement. Somebody doesn't have something, cannot do something, doesn't have the opportunity, there is a lack of something. We have seen that some people find it hard to use negative formulations. But from our experience, this is an extremely important part of the process that lays out the context and the foundation for constructive solutions, and it should not be avoided. Remember that this part of the process is about asking why a problem exists and what drives it, so that we can focus and not yet jump ahead to the solution. A negative formulation of the problem helps us stay in that mindset, while a positive formulation makes us think of solutions way too quickly. Fifth, following this mindset, do not embed the solution into the big problem definition. Avoid the words need or should in your problem statement, as otherwise it becomes prescriptive and limits the scope of other potential solutions. For example, in our experience, we have found that it is more useful for entrepreneurs to formulate the problem statement in the following way. Urban communities in Peru are not able to dispose of their municipal waste in a sanitary and environmentally sustainable manner. Rather than, most urban communities in Peru should be able to dispose of their municipal waste in a sanitary manner. If you got the previous points right and have a ready big problem formulation, then when you reverse the big problem statement and refine it a bit, you should have a clear vision that resonates with you and might be useful for communication and engagement purposes. In Albina's case, it would be urban communities in Peru dispose of their municipal waste in a sanitary and environmentally sustainable manner. One important note. Please know that the choice of the problem for the trunk in the problem tree exercise is a subjective matter, and there is no right or wrong. Ultimately, any societal problem could be placed in the center of attention or the trunk of the problem tree and analyzed. The question is, however, what element in the sequence of problems do you choose to be the center of your attention for this strategic process of several months? For which of the statements do you feel most energy, given what kind of consequences it has and from which root causes it stems? We encourage you to be ambitious. If you feel it's hard to choose one problem statement at this point and you have several competing statements, try to do the problem tree exercise for each of them. As a result, you might see more clearly how they are connected, whether one is a consequence of the other or they run in parallel, and where it makes most sense to start from. Once we have 1-2 sentences about the big problem, please go ahead and fill out the template in the course workbook. Use the checklist in the template to see whether your statement meets the criteria of a good problem definition. After you're done with the trunk, we can move on to the next part of our tree. We are now at the consequences part of the template, situated in the crown of the problem tree. We invite you to elaborate on the topic why the big problem formulated earlier is important. Being clear about the economic, social, and political consequences of the big problem can be of enormous value when you engage with partners and funders. We have seen social entrepreneurs successfully using the whole problem tree, but especially the consequences part, as a powerful communication and fundraising tool. While the definition of the big problem that you are addressing might not necessarily be appealing to other stakeholders, if you manage to show important consequences, you might get them on board easier. The following questions might help you arrive at a good definition of the consequences. Why do you care about the big problem at all? What happens if the big problem is not solved? Why should other stakeholders be worried or care about it? We recommend that you list 3-4 consequences for one big problem definition. When formulating them, consider who the most critical stakeholder for solving the big problem are, and come up with at least one compelling consequence for each group. For example, if already now you know that government's role is crucial, don't forget to highlight financial or political consequences of the problem for the state. If philanthropic players have an important role to play, make sure that in one of the statements in the crown you highlight social consequences of the problem and potential increase in costs of treating the problem if action is postponed. Your formulation of consequences can be of hypothetical nature, but statements supported with data and evidence have much more power. So if possible, do make an effort to find it or engage pro bono advisors, interns, or volunteers to help you with it. Let's come back to Albina's example. Consequence 1. Sprawling waste contributes to the spread of communicable diseases, directly or indirectly, through the multiplication of animals, for example, rats. Consequence 2. Sprawling waste can contaminate drinking water sources and farming areas, thus endangering food supplies. Consequence 3. Waste accumulation in unofficial garbage dumps create unsafe conditions for informal waste pickers. Consequence 4. Sooner or later, municipalities have to spend taxpayers' money on cleaning up dumps and treating negative health consequences among citizens. To give you a bit more detail, Albina's impact data from 2009 showed that failing to collect recyclable waste in the amount equivalent of Peru's national soccer stadium leads to about $250,000 a year in cleaning costs for municipalities. We will later learn that in 2009 alone, waste pickers were able to collect 50 times the volume of Peru's soccer stadium in terms of recyclable waste. You can now fill out the template and use the checklist in the course workbook to see whether your statements meet the criteria of good definition of consequences. Next, We are moving to the most important part of this exercise, the root of the problem tree. We particularly recommend that you do this part of the exercise with your team. The questions that will guide us in defining the root causes of the problem are: why is this problem in place? What leads to the problem? Please list a couple of reasons that come to you from the top of your head. Have another attempt later. Try to spot less obvious reasons. We recommend that on your template you end up listing 3 to 5 root causes for one big problem definition. Listing more of them can defeat the purpose of this particular exercise, which is to find a focus, and only listing the most obvious one would be too limiting. Here too, please remember to support your root cause statements with data. Sometimes we can be stuck with a certain perception of the root cause, and looking at exact data can open up a new perspective. What are the root causes for the example case of Albina that we use? Root cause 1. There is no sufficient formal infrastructure in place to collect and process waste. If we dig deeper, it stems from the fact that the topic has not been a priority in municipal politics. There has been no clear goals and regulations on managing real amounts of waste. There hasn't been clear accountability in place. There haven't been sufficient budget allocations or fees collected from citizens, and consequently, no sufficient physical infrastructure has been developed. Root cause 2. Current informal collection has had marginal effect. As waste pickers are fragmented, their activity is unregulated and often dangerous, and their efforts are inefficient, as they pick up waste from wherever they can find it, operating oftentimes at night, completely disconnected from the formal collection system. Root cause 3. Citizens, public entities, and private companies produce waste in increasingly large numbers and have neither motivation nor infrastructure to separate waste for further recycling, with little awareness of the consequences and little commitment to change these practices. Now it's the time to ask why once again. This time we will do so with a focus on systems. Why is this root cause in place? Which system is responsible for creating and maintaining the root cause you have identified? In Albina's case, the systems in question would be the system of waste collection in Peru, the system of waste processing, and the system of waste generation. When exploring the whys of root causes, it is quite easy to go too deep and be lost in philosophical discussions and rhetoric questions. Pinning down specific and tangible systems behind each root cause is an effective instrument to avoid it. Spotting systems behind root causes is a much needed step for those who want to address societal problems at large scale. Once you have identified systems behind each root cause, you can fill out the template in the course workbook for each of the root causes, according to the following structure. System X contributes towards the big problem because. If you're experiencing problems in formulating which system exactly is responsible for the big problem, don't worry, you're not alone. It is quite a challenging task to do, especially for the first time. But thinking in systems is a muscle that can be flexed. When defining systems behind the root causes, it might be helpful to have a better understanding of what a system actually is. A system is an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. And by elements here, we mean resources, rules, roles, and relationships that together achieve some results. When considering whether something can be called a system, ask yourself, does it have interconnected roles, stakeholders? Are there specific rules that govern their behavior? Does the interaction of stakeholders produce some results, both good and bad? Systems surround us and can be both obvious and familiar. For example, the system of education, the system of healthcare. They even have designated ministers. And less so, the national food market system or the system of diagnostics and care for elderly. It is important to note that systems can also be of different sizes and levels. Something small and local can also be a system, a family, a school, a local food market system. Systems of smaller size or local level can be part of the systems of higher level, just like a school is part of a regional educational system, which is part of the national educational system. Keep in mind that systems are intellectual constructs created by people to make navigation in this complex world somewhat easier. It means that when you find it hard to come up with a familiar name for a system that is responsible for a certain root cause, chances are that not many people see the system behind it. There might be no officially accepted name for it and no ministry that is responsible for it, compared to the system of education, for example. And you might need to be the first one to officially formulate and name it. Or you might even be the one who first recognizes the importance of developing a yet inexistent system. Once you have identified systems responsible for the root causes of the big problem, we will ask you to choose one system which you feel is both most relevant for solving the big problem and to which you feel you can contribute most. Our fellow Albina chose the waste collection system. When selecting the system to focus on, an important question to consider is who else is working to address several systemic root causes of the big problem. Recall other organizations doing good work to improve the systems you have listed. Do all systems have somebody working to improve them? Are there any orphaned ones? Given answers to these questions, does your choice of a system still make sense? It is now time to put this learning into practice and build your own problem tree for your strategy. You can find the specific section in your strategy workbook with specific guidelines on how to fill it in. Let's take a couple of minutes to recap the most important guidelines for doing this exercise. Don't forget to underpin your statements with data and statistics. When searching for data, don't limit yourself to data that only supports your assumptions. Seek evidence showing multiple perspectives. It will make for a much more powerful narrative and will ensure you're making right conclusions and developing effective solutions later on. A problem tree is an iterative exercise. Do it once at one go by yourself or with your team. Come back to this exercise several times later. Ask for opinions and ideas from your team and stakeholders. Make sure you feel comfortable with all the statements. The main purpose of this exercise is to make an informed choice of the specific system that is one of the root causes and needs to be improved among the many others that influence the big problem. Make sure you don't make it any more complex than that. We hope that by the end of several iterations of this exercise, you feel confident with your choice. The choice of a system now will set the direction of our work in the next weeks. Congratulations on finishing Module 2 of your systems change journey. In the next module, we will move one step forward and we'll ask why again. This time, we will focus on what is it that is not functioning well in the system you have selected. Depending on what's wrong with the system, a role of a social entrepreneur and a broader partnership around him or her can vary, from working to improve some elements, interconnections, or rules within the system, to strengthening its health or building it up from scratch in case it's inexistent or largely underdeveloped. We look forward to seeing you again in the next module.